Theodore John Kazinski, best known to the world as Ted Kazinski, the Unabomber. He was the longest running domestic terrorist in American history. What was he like before being known as the Unabomber? Was he always this way? Was he just a normal person? What would it be like if the Unabomber lived right in your backyard? Join me as I speak with author Jamie Gehring on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I am your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't done so already, make sure you're following us on all of our social medias, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, we're there. All of those links will be down in the description of this podcast episode. Today, I am privileged to have a very special person with us. If you have not heard of this young lady, you're going to today. So the author that we have with us, she is a native of Montana. She grew up sharing a backyard with, of all people, Ted Kazinski. He was widely known as the Unabomber. She is featured in Netflix's Unabomber in his own words. She does discuss her family's role in Ted's capture, and she is the author of a very good book called Madman in the Woods, Life Next Door to the Unabomber. It released April 19th, 2022. Please welcome to the show, Jamie Gehring. Jamie, how are you doing today?
I am doing really well, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. It's very exciting for me. I tell all the authors how I found you when you come on my show. So now it's your turn. I actually found you through NetGalley. One of my filters is true crime, and your book popped up. And when it did, I read the synopsis they gave us, and I said, I need to read this book. So, as you know, on NetGalley, it's hit or miss. And so my wife comes to me and goes, you have all these books. Which one, if only you could have one book that you got approved for right now, which one would it be? It says, it's got to be Madman in the Woods. The cover alone, right? So we see Ted looking a normal human being. And then you say you was the neighbor to Ted. That's just shocking. So how did all that come to be? Give us a little bit of background, that people who haven't read the book don't know about.
Yeah, so I love that you comment about the cover, first of all, and that you found it on NetGalley. But yeah, when deciding on what image we were going to put literally face first on the cover of this book, it took some deliberation for sure, but we really wanted to, and when I say we, the publisher and I really wanted to show this side of Ted Kazinski, aka the Unabomber, that may not be as well known. And so, that is what really fueled me to write the book, is giving my own perspective on this person, and how I felt as a little kid and as a teenager when he was arrested, and then as a mom and a grown-up looking back and truly understanding how much danger we were in. Just to give a little bit of background for those that may not know who the Unabomber is, he was the longest running domestic terrorist in United States history. He killed 3, injured 23 people over a span of 17 years. We lived a quarter mile away from him in a rural environment. And so we were much more close knit in that type of community. We're bringing him firewood. We're checking in on him. He's coming over for dinner. So that looked a little bit different because of where we lived. And so really, I guess that's it in a nutshell, kind of, just a small amount of background and what kind of that looked like.
So I believe it's Lincoln, Montana, correct, that you guys lived in?
Yes, Lincoln, Montana.
So very small rural area. I do know from my own studies that, before he started getting into all of this, Ted wanted some place that was very seclusive. He didn't want to be out in the open. So he stumbles against your small piece of land. Now, to most people, this land is too tiny to want to buy. From your recollection, how did he come about buying this land from your family?
So our family were and are still cattle ranchers, and my grandfather had about 9,000 acres in and around Lincoln, Montana. And he decided in 1971 to list 1.4 acre, which is a small plot of land, but he was in need of cash, and it wasn't something that he really needed for his ranching operations. So once that was listed, Ted Kazinski found it, and yes, he was looking for something secluded. This particular property was about 4 miles outside of Lincoln, Montana, and this is a town even now that has one blinking stoplight. It is 1,000 residents, give or take, depending on the season. And so, in 1971, it was even more primitive, more rural, and it's exactly what he was looking for, because he could be isolated, and he could also kind of blend into the community, because in that rural environment, there were others that were living this seemingly self-sustaining lifestyle, off-grid, and that's just what he appeared to be, this reclusive hermit.
Being that he kind of looked like a normal human being, probably at the time that he found your grandfather in the land, it wasn't openly suspicious right away that he was in this small town. I mean, I know Chris Waits has spoken on things like he's offered him rides before and he's turned them down. When did you start noticing the change of Ted Kazinski going into what we know as the Unabomber?
So in 1971, when him and his brother David purchased the property from my grandfather, Ted definitely looked much more like the Berkeley professor than the Unabomber that was pulled from his cabin in 1996. But through the years, especially, late 70s, early 80s, he started to look much more like a mountain man. His hair was disheveled, his clothes kind of, had holes in them, his shoes had holes in them. He didn't care about his physical appearance, or it didn't seem like he did. And then really in the later 80s, early 90s, we all noticed just kind of the de-evolution, I guess, of our neighbor. And he was much more isolated at that time. I mean, for obvious reasons. He was at the height of his reign of domestic terror, and he was murdering people. And so, I think he was just possibly deeper into his own psychosis, deeper into his own reign of terror, and also just that self-imposed isolation. And so he definitely started looking and acting, a little scarier, I suppose. And then it wasn't much long after that he was arrested. And of course, at the time, he was the suspected Unabomber. And we come to find out that yes, it wasn't too long before they found evidence in his cabin that linked him to those crimes.
So I do want to point out, because during my other podcast, A Day with Crime, we talk a lot about serial killers. We've talked about the Ted Bundys. We've talked about the BTKs. A number of things that they seem to all kind of have in common, especially when it comes to Bundy and now Ted Kazinski. Ted Kazinski was very, very smart. He was a professor. He actually has a title of doctor. He had several degrees. What do you think? And now, and the other thing too, I'll point this out, the other thing too is a lot of these serial killers also have issues at home. They're recluse from their parents. They have a strained relationship. Ted fits into that. After meeting him, when do you think the Unabomber side of him started coming out? How long do you guys think that he was back there practicing how to make bombs and things of that nature?
Well, we personally were shocked when he was arrested. I mean, even when the FBI came to my father before his arrest and confided in him, that they said that they suspected Ted of writing some threatening letters and they were investigating him. And then as my father and FBI agent Max Knoll developed a stronger, closer relationship, decided they could trust each other, Max did confide in my father that they had suspected Ted of being the Unabomber. And even at that point, just months before his arrest, my father was shocked. Yes, this man is strange. Yes, they've had their disagreements through the years. And there were times where my dad didn't think he could trust him and just kind of got a bit of a feeling about him. But there was no part of him that ever believed at that point that Ted could be responsible for murdering, for maiming, for eluding the FBI for 17 years. Here's this man who, looks like he's just living off the land. He looks, he's hunting his own food. He's in this 10 by 12 cabin with no running water, no electricity. He had told my father that he had lived on only about $200 a year. How could a man living this way possibly be responsible for these crimes? It was a very, very difficult thing for all of us to even consider. And so there was really at no point during the time we were neighbors was he suspected of doing anything like that. And even when the FBI was standing in front of my dad saying, this is possibly who this man is, he was shocked. So it was, at the arrest, we had to kind of face that. And then I was reminded by my own mother that I was still kind of in denial about it when it originally happened. I was only 16, and I kept saying, well, if he's actually convicted, I mean, who knows if he actually did it? Because I think it's just a really difficult and strange thing to face when you've known somebody and they end up being a killer. And that's, I think, especially, at 16, it's a pretty difficult thing to process and accept.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that didn't want to accept that, especially when it came to his brother and his family, which I'll ask you about that in a minute, because I do have this question. So Wendy Gehring, which I believe is your stepmother.
Yes.
She spoke a lot at large. You talk about this in the book, but she really honed in on it in the documentary of the time that she feels that Ted tried to kill her and your sister. Mm-hmm. And she feels that the only reason why he did not kill her, and Tess, I believe is your sister's name, mm-hmm. was because it would be too close to his home. They would be able to identify who it came from. Even after that scare, you guys still didn't think that maybe he was doing something else that he shouldn't have been doing?
No, because at the time, my stepmother didn't realize that it was Ted in those woods pointing a rifle at her and my little sister. My stepmother had felt something ominous. She knew something was out there, but she thought maybe it was a mountain lion or, some type of predator, a bear. And so she got scared and grabbed my sister, got her in the truck, went home, didn't really think too much about it until Ted's arrest. And she saw the journal entries that Ted Kazinski had written about, how he had thought about killing my stepmom and my little sister. And, there were, through the years, when you look back, there were definitely times where, I guess your intuition was there. Something was off. And that's a perfect example for her. She felt something, but she wasn't able to put her finger on it until years later.
And I don't know if I'll be able to either, because, people, you guys have got to read this book. You have pictures in there. You can look it up on Google, the cabin that he was living in. No regular human being could live in that tiny of a space. He has shells everywhere, but it's almost like the shells is on top of him. And yes, we have strange people. By the time he got arrested, he looked like he could have been the brother to Bigfoot. Because no bathing, hair everywhere. You would never suspect somebody like him just living in the woods would do something like that. But to point out to the audience, he went on 17 years doing this, people. He tried several different bomb methods. He got away with it for years. Nobody could pin down who he was. Don't know how he did this, but he was not the dumb criminal. There was no hair. There was no fingerprints. There was nothing. So there was nowhere anybody could figure out what was going on. until one day he writes this manifesto. So he writes this manifesto, he gets it published. As they talked about, they didn't really want to put it out there because they felt like that they was giving him this voice. But they felt like if they put it out there, maybe somebody could identify who he was. How do you feel that a lot of people, even today, professors even, feel that he was right in his manifesto? That if he wouldn't have become who he is now, that maybe this would be something they would use in class to teach us against technology. Now that you know who he is, how do you feel about that?
Well, I talk about this in my own book, but there are glimpses of brilliance in his writings, in his ideas, but I feel like everything is negated because he was using violence and killing for his claimed ideals. And I think that's one of the things that was also difficult in writing this is I was personally, trying to uncover his own motivations, and so many of his writings in his crime journals, which I talk about a lot in the book, but just for your listeners, they were literally Mead notebooks that were found in this cabin after Ted's arrest, where he recorded all of his thoughts, what he ate that day, what he hunted, and also he had a specific journal for his crimes that he wrote in code that the FBI was able to unlock after the arrest. But in all of those, there were still glimpses of brilliance, and then there was and then the next day you would read something that he was motivated by revenge, and he was motivated by hate, and he would say it himself, and it wasn't about this altruistic mission. And so it's hard for me even to say at this point, what was motivating him, and really what to believe in his writings, because they were truly all over the place. And you're right, the only reason that manifesto was published was because the FBI hoped that somebody would recognize a specific idiom or the railing against technology and finally be able to link this man or this group, who knows what it was at that point, to these crimes. And so they weren't publishing the manifesto because of what it said or because there was some hidden brilliance in it.
It kind of reminds me a lot of the David Koresh case, because that's where he was. He wanted something to go. He go, oh, if you put this on the air, I'll come out and Branch Davidians. And then he reneged on that, and we know what happened with that.
I do want to point out as well, in his pleadings to get this manifesto published, he did say he would cease all violence, all domestic terror activities. And after the arrest and after Ted's cabin was searched, there was a bomb that was found, and it was addressed and ready to be sent. There was a hit list. So it didn't seem as though there was any end in sight, even though he had claimed, he would stop.
And for the audience who don't know or haven't heard about Ted Kazinski, his whole thing was he hated technology. He felt that technology was going to be the downfall of the world and was going to bring it down. I work in technology. I can tell you that, yes, some of the things he written was true. There's a lot of places now that's looking to replace humans with machines. There's also ways to get that across without blowing people up too at the same time. I wanted to touch with you on this. So your father, Butch, Ted had issues with him. Now, if you guys don't know, Ted hated everything that was anything technology, whether it was mills, whether it was motorcycles. I mean, he actually tried to hunt down. He actually went to somebody's cabin because they had motorcycles running past his cabin, and he took an axe to it. Your father and him had issues because of the mill that he ran. How did Butch feel about that after the run-ins with Ted at that point? Did he feel that he was in any danger, or was just Ted being Ted?
So after Ted's arrest, my father definitely felt that we were in danger, but again, just kind of came back to the same mantra of, well, we were too close. And but there were things that happened through the years to my father's sawmill. His mill was sanded, and somebody had sabotaged it. At the time, that my dad actually did have a moment where he thought, "Oh my gosh, what if it was Ted? I don't know if I trust this person." And it was Chris Waits he was talking to, another neighbor. And he was like, "Oh no, Ted wouldn't do something like that. Ted's not capable of anything like that." And my dad just kind of brushed it off. But after Ted's arrest, we were able to very clearly look back and really take a look at those moments where there was sabotage, or there were altercations with my father and Ted that made a lot more sense. And yeah, I mean, we were definitely in danger those years that we were neighbors of Ted's.
I really felt for Chris Waits too, especially in the documentary, because you can see in his face after he went after the cabin of the people who's riding the motorcycles. The sheriff actually came to him and said, "Hey, what about your friend Ted down the way? Do you think he did this?" And he was like, "No way Ted did it." And he's like, "Then I find out it was Ted." And he goes, "I feel like that I helped get him off of the suspects list, but no fault of his own because nobody knows." Do you feel that the manifesto is what brought Ted Kazinski down? So just to give some background on that, Linda, who's David Kazinski's wife, actually went to David and said, "Hey, I think the Unabomber is your brother." Of course, David wanted to denounce that because it's his brother. I would have done the same thing. The manifesto gets released. David Kazinski's mom gets sick, goes to her house, ends up finding something that looks like the mini version of that. Do you think that that is what actually brought him down? Because at this point now, David has no choice but to call the police and FBI and say, "Hey, I think he's my brother."
So I think it's a combination of things. I definitely believe that because Ted got his manifesto published, that was the end of him. Yes, Linda recognized Ted's ideals and went to David, and there was no part of him that wanted to believe that his brother could possibly be the Unabomber. And so it took a lot of deliberation. They actually hired an outside person to go through writings of Ted's. And really what David was hoping for is that they would be able to prove that Ted was not the Unabomber. And as history shows, that was not the case. And so that was a really interesting part of the story while I was writing about it, because, part of how I was able to tell parts of the narrative that I wasn't present for in my own book was through interviews from the FBI, through David Kazinski. And so I was able to really, hear how difficult that decision was and what they went through in order to, prove or not prove that Ted could possibly be the Unabomber. And even when they discovered that it could be Ted, David wanted to go visit his brother because he felt like at that point, being, across the table from your own brother, you would be able to sense something like that. He would be able to know, yes or no, my brother is responsible for killing and maiming, and kind of get a sense of his mental status at that point. And Ted refused to see him and pushed him away even further. And then at that point, David had no other choice but to go to the FBI. Him and Linda could not see one more person getting killed or maimed. And so it was those two actions that really were the end of the Unabomber.
So it's written, even today, it's still written all over David Kazinski's face. He feels like, he was against the wall. He was against the wall of portraying his brother and trying to save other people that knew could be killed. Even in this documentary years later, I put him in the same boat of Carrie Rawson, who's the daughter of the BTK killer, as well as Stephen Jones, who's the son of Jim Jones, as well as Jim Jones Jr. These are the guys that you see. Yes, Jim Jones had many other kids, but Stephen and Jim is the two that's always in the spotlight. They always get beat up because they're like, "Oh, you couldn't tell this is your dad." And like Carrie Rawson said in her book, he was just my dad. We went on trips. And I feel the same way about David Kazinski. I want to get to how you feel about him. I think, David Kazinski in his own right has also written a book. It's called Every Last Tie, The Story of the Unabomber and His Family. But I think as the author of this book, he gave you the biggest endorsement. Here's what he wrote in the review for you. He says, Jamie Gehring's book might well be the best attempt yet to understand the strange life and mind of my brother, Theodore J. Kazinski. He wrote a book, he lived with them, but he's saying that your book is the best book out there. He's pointing people there. How do you feel about that? And what's your relationship with David like today?
I get chills still when I read that blurb from David. I mean, he has been such a huge supporter of this book. And you mentioned the Netflix documentary Unabomber in his own words earlier. David and I both participated in that documentary, and that's when we first met virtually. And since then, we've developed a very close relationship, and he appreciated me being very honest about the fact that I was writing a book in those early years because, for good reason, he definitely gets a lot of questions and a lot of people that want to talk about the topic. So, I mean, it was the biggest compliment that David wrote those words about my book. And he was there, year after year as I was doing my research, and he was able to witness all of the hard work that I put into this to really try to understand this person and understand my own part of it and kind of myself through it. So yeah, it was a big moment, and I'm so appreciative of David Kazinski for that.
David actually went on what I call a tour. He decided that he wanted to reach out to some of the victims of his brother and try to make amends. One of the guys documentary said, this is not your burden to bear. I appreciate it. They became good friends. It's not his burden to bear, but I understand where he's coming from, right? When you carry that last name, Carrie Rawson kind of gets away with it a little bit because she didn't carry her father's last name, but she wanted to be known who she was. As treacherous as it is, I don't have any serial killers in my family that I know of, but I think I would feel the same way, right? If somebody's responsible for doing something with my last name, I kind of want people to feel like, or to know, that was my brother. Just because he did that, that doesn't mean it's me. I'm the one that helped turn them in. That did cost him his relationship with Ted. Did Ted ever bounce back from that? Has he seen David since, or is he still not wanting anything to do with him?
He still does not want anything to do with his brother. And, it is heartbreaking for David still to this day to be completely cut out this way. But that's the choice that Ted has made.
Well, I commend David. It was hard to do, but I hope he knows, and if he ever listens to this, how many thousands of people's lives he saved by turning his brother in. I don't think, from everything I've read about Ted Kazinski and everything I know and studies I've done on him, I don't think he would have ever stopped. The only way he would have ever stopped is if he got what he wanted, which will be for the world to be technology free, which you and I both know that's never going to happen. It's technology evolves every day. And to come out and actually say, literally, in the manifesto, I had to kill people to get this published. You don't have to kill people to get things published.
I agree. I don't think that Ted would have stopped until there was a revolution against the Industrial Revolution in technology.
So after all these years, nobody knowing who you were, I've always wondered where Ted lived. We always saw the cabin. We saw the cabin he got arrested, but we never knew where it was, who his neighbors was. It's like it's just woods. So after all this years, all this time, I believe he was 5 years old when you first encountered Ted Kazinski, or remember any recollection of him. Why write this book now?
So in 1996, when Ted was arrested, I was only 16 years old. And, up until that point, there was already such a long history of Ted and my family. And of course, at that point, I was not in a position to write a book about the experience. But through the years, I've always wanted to. And, I lost my father due to cancer years ago. And that kind of pushed me a little bit further, just knowing that I need to tell the story and I need to tell his part in it. So that was really important for me to kind of honor his memory. And then I had lost my sister. And so I was kind of dealing with a lot of issues, on in grief and understanding that, and kind of understanding, as a death does, understanding your place in the world. And so my book definitely has much larger themes beyond, just true crime or Ted Kazinski. It's me really kind of, going through these very universal human emotions. And I think that is really, what pushed me to finally finish this. And at the time too, I had participated in the Netflix documentary, and each time I spoke with one of the producers, they would say, you have to finish this book. This perspective is so interesting because, we were the only ones interacting with Ted. It still was on a very limited basis because he was a hermit, and come to find out, of course, he was the Unabomber, but he wasn't, he wasn't interacting with really anyone else on a regular basis all of those years that he was a domestic terrorist. So to look back on that and to really be able to say, what does a domestic terrorist look like? What does it feel like? What, those times with that person, what is it like to then be an adult and look back and be able to kind of deconstruct those events that took place with a serial killer? It is just, for me personally, it was important. And, it was something I just felt like I had to share, and people who are reading it, I feel like are really connecting to that. So I'm very grateful.
This is your first book. So what has your life been like since releasing this book?
It is my first book, and the book took close to 6 years to release out into the world. I mean, it was a lot of research and a lot of revising, a lot of, learning about the industry and finding an agent and a publisher and all the things that you need to do. So now that it's in the world, it has definitely calmed down for me a bit. I mean, I went on tour, which was incredible. I've been doing a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews. I took a month off just to kind of decompress a little bit. And now I'm, back to, finding the readers for my book and trying to, beyond just finding them, trying to really connect with them. I mean, a lot of people find me on social media and will message me, and I always try to respond because I really do appreciate someone who is a reader and they connected with a theme in my book and then takes the time to tell me about that. As an author, that is so powerful.
Here at True Crime and Authors, I read a lot of books. Every author that you've heard me interview and everyone that you will hear me interview, I've either read one of their books or I'm in the process of reading one. So how do I keep up with all of the books that I read? Well, that is where the show's sponsor, Catch Creations 614, comes into play. Catch Creations makes digital handmade planners and journals, and for those who want something on paper, printables as well. She can make anything from My Little Pony to Black Panther, anything that you can creatively think of, Catch Creations 614 can get it done. With excellent customer service and excellent communication, the owner, Kristen, will make sure that your journal comes out right and perfect the first time. And for those who are listeners of this show, you will get a special 10% discount when you use the code TrueCrime10. Catch Creations, best handmade planners, journals, and printables in the business. Check it out now. Well, I'm sure you've seen it, but I want to share with the world what I felt about your book. So I'll read the review that I actually left for you that was published on NetGalley, on Bookstagram. I believe I do it on Amazon too when the time came. But this is what I said. I said, excellent. This is another 5-star read. Jamie Gehring put her heart and soul into this book. Imagine as a kid living next door to a man that you had no idea would one day become the Unabomber. Being a true crime podcaster, I've read many things on Ted Kazinski, but never like this. This is an account from a person who knows and lived it. This is the most comprehensive account of the beginning and the eventual end of Ted Kazinski as we know it. She makes you feel everything she was and has and maybe still battles with. From the first page to the end, you are brought into her journey and you don't want to stop until you are done. When we do our episode on Ted Kazinski, I will be referencing this book. Well done, Jamie Gehring. 5 years has paid off into this masterpiece. Thanks for sharing what I know was a very difficult part of your life. And I put, if you ever wanted to know how Ted Kazinski thought, lived, and what led him to do the horrific things he has done, then you must read this book. So I thank you for writing this book. I have not done an episode on Ted Kazinski yet. That is my plan. I will be referencing your book a lot. You have a lot of great information. There's a lot of photos. The coding thing was, I've never seen it like it before. Kudos to the FBI who could decode that. If it's just books of numbers. What's next for Jamie Gehring? Is this the only book we're going to see? Are you writing another book? What can we look forward to?
We shall see. So first, before I answer that question, I really want to thank you for not only having me on the podcast, but leaving such a thoughtful review. I mean, it really shows that you read the book, you connected with the book, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you so much, David, for taking the time to write that. Reviews are so important, especially for indie authors who are trying to play like the Amazon algorithm game. So that's incredible. And then, what's next for me? At this point, I'm just really enjoying the fact that my book is out in the world, that people are reading it and connecting with it and reaching out to me about it. It's been really fun, and so I'm just embracing that right now. I have had a couple of people reach out to me asking if I would consider co-authoring a book with them. They've experienced a true crime event in their life and they really want to tell their story. And so I'm considering that. And so I guess we'll see.
Well, I thank you for coming on the show. You are, as far as I'm concerned, you're a big author. I've been a fan of yours since reading that book. And it's done a lot for me. It's opened up a lot of insight and things that I knew or thought I knew, but didn't really know. So whatever you write, you have a fan over here. I'm behind you 100%. So I do thank you for coming on here. When I wrote you and said, would you come on the show? I was like, man, she's so busy. She's probably going to tell me no. When you agreed to come on, I was ecstatic. So I appreciate it. In closing, is there anything you would like to say to your readers and your fans out there?
I really just want to say thank you. If you've read my book, if you've bought it, if you've just asked your library to carry it, whatever, you could even borrow it from a friend, honestly, whatever capacity it is that in which you have read this, thank you. And, it would mean the world to me if you enjoyed it to leave me a review, like David said, on Amazon or Goodreads, anywhere you can basically leave a review. It would be incredibly helpful.
Well, Jamie, I totally appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you very much. Please keep in touch with me. Let me know what's going down with you so we can keep track. And if you ever want to come back on the show for any reason, you're always welcome to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. So that was the incredible Jamie Gehring. Her book, again, Madman in the Woods, Life Next Door to the Unabomber. It is available now. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any place else that you buy your books. Whatever you do, go buy this book. Leave her a review. She is an independent author. This means she relies on us, the reader, to get the word out. She doesn't have a big house behind her. So again, Madman in the Woods, Life Next Door to the Unabomber. Go pick that up. So again, Jamie Gehring, thank you for coming on the show. Guys, as always, follow us on social media. Everything about Jamie Gehring, where you can reach her, her website is in the show notes of this episode. We hope that you guys are being safe. Always be good to yourself and each other. And remember that this is the podcast that brings two passions together. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.